So welcome to this evening's virtual event in honor of National Volunteer Week. Thank you for joining us. And as always, I'll say this every night, but thank you for everything that you have done or will do as part of Sin Barreras. Today, the event will be focused on getting to know 3 people at Sin Barreras who are on our advocacy committee. And then they'll also be discussing advocacy, the kinds of things that they do, and also just like what is advocacy in the area and how is Sin Barreras engaged in it. So, and all of those wonderful things. So I think what I'll do is I'll just start out. So the 3 presenters are Abby Akije, Dan Vogus, and Edgar Lara. So I believe they prepared something, but I'll just start us out by saying, if you could initially just share a little bit about yourself or how you got involved and sort of the types of things that you do. Yeah.
How long do you want us to go for, each of us?
Well, probably you could each do about 5 minutes.
Okay. Less is probably good, right? Well, I'm talking, so I'll start. So my name is Edgar Lara. I grew up in California Central Valley. I joined the Marine Corps after high school. During that time, my mom and family and brothers and stepdad, they moved to Waynesboro, which is 30 minutes west of here. I then went to UCLA and started working in consulting and finance after college. And I did that for a long time. And about 8 or 9 years ago, I was in a traveling position. So I decided to come live near, because it didn't matter. I decided to come near, live near family for a while. So I came to Charlottesville 8 or 9 years ago, expecting to stay for a year or 2. So yeah, I'm going on 9 years, I think, and I don't have plans of leaving yet. So yeah, and one of the things that stuck out to me most when I moved here was how invisible the community that I came from was here and how segregated things were. So, when I went out to meet people, there'd always be some subtle comments or, just little things that made it clear that most people weren't used to people like me or people that, from the community that I come from. These things made me, start looking for not just the community, but people or organizations that were maybe trying to help this community. And, I wondered whether I would need to start something on my own. But luckily, an organization already existed called Sin Barreras. It had been around for a couple of years. And my first experience with them was in 2015, Sigo Sabroso. That was a great event. It's funny because I showed up and people didn't really know what to do with me or other volunteers that showed up. So I immediately assigned myself some tasks and I started assigning other people tasks. And really that's kind of how things have gone for a long time, or basically since. So the following year in 2016, Sin Barreras had a grant to hire a part-time employee along with its matching funds. And Sin Barreras was already pretty active for its size, and there was a lot of need. So that new person, it's hard for a new person to come in and make things work, right? So we quickly overwhelmed that person, so that didn't work out. And I wondered how we were going to find someone who could make this work. And I had doubts, so I basically said, I took a break from what I used to do, and I took the position, right, with the intention of setting up a process and some structure so that people could do this job more easily, or at least get things done in the future, right? And that was the intention. So I was an employee for a while, and now I'm not, but still that's a lot of what I ended up doing, trying to create a roadmap for others in the future. And so, I mean, there's a whole lot more to say about all of this, but That's how I started with Sin Barreras, and I'm all about Sin Barreras' mission. It's been a great vehicle for me to make a difference in the community, and I'm very grateful to be able to do with other people the great people who care a lot too. It's way better than trying to do it on my own. And I don't know how much experience you have with nonprofits, but trying to do things on your own, I mean, it's not the way to go. But so yeah, that's roughly my experience.
And now you are on the board, correct?
Yeah, I'm a board member now for, I think, almost 3 years. Yeah.
Abby or Dan?
Shall I go next? Yeah. Okay, well, my name is Dan Vogus. I am a retired attorney. I was a in-house corporate attorney for many years. I moved to Charlottesville about 6 years ago. Spent most of my time, adult time, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but I went to law school here, so it was, and I had a daughter living here, so it was a natural move to come to Charlottesville. I became aware of Sin Barreras right after the 2016 election. There was a indivisible Charlottesville rally right after that election, and Edgar spoke briefly at that rally. I think a lot of people recognized that it was going to be a rough 4 years for the immigrant communities all across the U.S. So I wanted to see what I could do to help out. So I did talk to Edgar at that meeting, and I met with Edgar and other board members throughout the next several months. And finally, in early 2018, Edgar invited me to join the advocacy committee for Sin Barreras, and I was happy to join, and it's been an extremely rewarding experience for the 3 years that I've been on the committees. And recently, Sin Barreras asked me to join the board, and I've been a board member for about 2 months now. Yeah, it's been a great, for me, it's been a very, as I said, rewarding and fulfilling experience to be on the advocacy committee and now on the board. So with that, I'll turn it over to Abby.
Hi, everyone. I'm Abby Akihe. I'm a second-year student here at the University of Virginia, studying psychology, and next year I'll be pursuing a master's in public policy and leadership. I joined Sin Barreras last year, right before the pandemic hit, approximately like 2 weeks before. I met Edgar. He was a panelist for a club I was in, the Latinx Leadership Institute. Afterwards, we just exchanged information, and the next day he said, there's an advocacy committee meeting. I'd really love someone to be there because we've had a need for a note taker type intern for a while now. So let's see how it works. And I did that. I'm still doing a lot of note taking and emails, but my position has really evolved over the last year and few months. I've gotten more involved in like separate things and research, Drive Virginia Forward, voter registration, things of that nature. And yeah, like Dan said, it's a very rewarding experience. That's all I have.
Great. Thank you each very much for sharing those things. And I also appreciate that you all spoke to why you were kind of, moved to be a part of the organization. And it sounds like why you've continued to stick around. So that's appreciated. So at this stage, I think, are there any questions that people have out there for any of the three individuals who shared, or general questions maybe about advocacy? Go ahead, Avery.
Yeah, just a general question about advocacy. Can you describe what the progress is now? What if there's a mission set that you're working from with the city or with the state, or goals that you're working to reach and that sort of thing?
There's many. There's many. I don't know that we have it well defined. I think it's, we'll talk more about that soon, but it's been evolving. And I think one of the things we definitely want to do is include more people, because I don't know if this has come up yet, but I mean, we're still small, especially in terms of funding, with a small staff, and there's very involved volunteers who do a lot of the work. And, part of what we're trying to do is let go of some of the work and share it with others. And it's not like there's a easy way for people to get involved, but if you're like moved to, we definitely ask for patience and just creativity as people get involved. But I think a lot of it is issue focused, right? There's the things that are most important for the community. That's what we want to work on. And I think that's driven the work that we've done in advocacy from the beginning, right? Because, and we'll get into it more soon, but because of the work and how connected we are to the community, we see lots of issues, we hear lots of issues. So, it's our responsibility, or we feel it's our responsibility, to raise those issues and then do more, right? And get involved and activate people and so forth. And, we will be talking about some of these coming up, but is that enough for right now?
Yeah, I
that's
just
good.
want to
Thank you.
first make sure there's not any other questions floating out there before you start your presentation. I actually have a question for you, Abby. Yeah, so since you are, like, at least based on this sample that the volunteers will notice, since you're the youngest on the panel, could you speak a little bit to maybe, like what it's like being a young person on the advocacy committee, and maybe like the extent of which you've been able to like get involved, and what that's done for you, maybe in terms of like personal skills or leadership or anything like that?
Yeah, definitely. I will say, like, at the beginning, it was very like overwhelming. Like the very first meeting, I sat down and I was like, wow, okay, this is different. I'm normally in settings with just college age students. That was my comfort zone, and I kind of went out of the like UVA area out into like the greater Charlottesville and sat down at this big conference table with all these people who were like lawyers, professors, all of these people, board members. So that was definitely something that was a bit challenging. And I will say that for the first couple months, I was quiet and just took notes. But and I'm sure Dan and Edgar may have noticed, like, I slowly started to add my ideas a little more. And obviously, like every meeting, we call them like action items. Action items come up for things we have to do, newsletters, registrations for things, subcommittees. Like there's always something, and I was always very hesitant to kind of put my name out there. And I would maybe like send an email or text Edgar later on, and I'd be like, oh, actually, I am interested in that. I just didn't speak up during the meeting. But now I'm definitely more comfortable. And like I said, my position has really evolved, and I like to help out in as many things that I can, given my like academics and whatnot. So it's definitely manageable. All the full committee is like very welcoming and open to talking about everything. I don't really feel like there's like a huge barrier there.
Abby jumped right into like a very active moment too. So like day one, you showed up with the advocacy committee, right? Day two, you're with this other like community group where, we were, I don't know, brainstorming and planning actions.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions floating out there with anyone? Alrighty. So at this time, Dan and Edgar and Abby have prepared, well, I'm not even going to explain it. You shall share what it is about advocacy that you believe would be most helpful for volunteers to know, and take it away.
Well, we have a little presentation later, just with some pictures, but right now we'll just get into sharing with you. And I'll start out with just talking about how, at least from my perspective, how we got started in advocacy, Sin Barreras. And, because Sin Barreras has always been focused on direct service and then education with different workshops and so on. But like I said earlier, because we see and hear so many issues, it is a responsibility to raise those issues, right? I think other organizations, one of the things that's special about Sin Barreras is that, like, other organizations will really hold back and not want to step into some of these issues. We've never held back. I mean, I laugh a little because, there's good and bad, but the thing is we really care, and we really put our heart into it, and we really jump into things especially when it matters. As you'll see, or we'll talk about, a lot of the work happens behind the scenes, but when it matters, we're not just behind the scenes, right? We show up and we're visible and we're heard, or we try to make ourselves heard. But yeah, so in the beginning, it was mostly about leveraging the efforts of other organizations and bringing that information here locally, and just doing what we could. But again, we were just starting out. And even for me personally, I wasn't very involved in advocacy, right? A lot of my advocacy started with Sin Barreras, and it started with just kind of tagging along and listening to a few people, and it's really grown, and it continues to grow. And Sin Barreras, it started as a working board, and it's currently still transitioning from that. That means, board members, or like those are of us that are very involved, we did all the work, right, instead of staff. But little by little, we've been adding staff, and the work of volunteers is crucial. But at the same time, we also need staff to support all these efforts that will make us sustainable. So we, in 2017, especially, I mean, 2016, when I joined, I thought I was going to be helping Sin Barreras build for the future, but the elections of 2016 really changed everything, and there were still people that hoped for the best, but 2017 we really saw it was just craziness, right? And so many people in the community would turn to us, and it's so lucky that I started in that position, that part-time position, but was really full-time. So we started building structure, which helped us prepare for what was coming without us knowing it, right? But we were really preparing, and 2017 was incredibly overwhelming in many ways. But the thing that we did most in many areas is, I think, answer the call as best we could, and and that many times meant showing up to, or even leading different events, because we're the ones that know the community. Like, everybody gets riled up and says, we need to do something, but they don't know the community, right? They don't know who they're talking about. So it's great that they're like wanting to learn about it, and that was our moment to share, right? And it's not like we had presentations prepared or anything like this, and we still do this, but what we do is just tap into what we know, what we see every day, what we feel, and even our own history, right? Because a lot of us, Fanny, our leader, and we have other leaders here too, right? Like I'm also one, and we tap into our own like family history, even, because this issue, like the whole criminalization and all this misinformation that's out there, our answer to it is just talking about what we know, what we see, and what we've experienced, because it clearly shows that it's not the way so many others try to paint it, right? Paint this picture. So anyway, we evolved, and the creation of the advocacy committee really came from that real need, because we were a working board, and we're less a working board now, but transitioning. The board, a few people pretty much answered all questions. So when, you might get like even now, you might get some people out in the community saying, what are you guys doing about, all the stuff that's happening on the border, or what are you doing about this? And, we're a tiny organization. And the thing that we realized is, well, what is it that we can do about these things? And usually it's about shedding some light on what's happening, federally, statewide, and other places we could have more impact, but we needed to form an advocacy committee, right, to take pressure off of the board, right, because everything went to them, and we needed to separate that a bit, because, and we still have multiple, and even from the very beginning, we still have multiple of the same people in this committee, but at least it also opens the door to other people to get involved. Like Dan, he was one of the first people I called, because I'd known him for a while, and I knew he was a retired attorney and that he was interested in getting involved. But we invited him to a few things, but he hadn't really yet found the place where he could help. And so I invited him to this, and it's turned out to be a very good place for him. And we needed to open the door, right? And I think in so many other ways, we're still working on that, right? We want to open the door, and without realizing at times, we could kind of have just a crack, and we want to open it a lot more, right? Because we say we want people, but it's not, because we're so busy and maybe sometimes set in our ways, or want things done a certain ways, maybe, and not directly, but indirectly, we kind of close the door a little bit. And but we, as much as possible, want to, and the committee was a way to do that, right? To open the door. And we're so glad this has happened, because the different members, the two, Dan and Abby, are here with us, I think primarily because they first stepped through the door with this committee, but then there's been other things they've been involved with too, both of them. And anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about how it started and how it began to change, and then I think Dan is going to share a little bit more about how we've continued to evolve.
And I think that, and I think that'll also give some idea of what we've been doing over the past 3 years. So, when we started, we were a little bit all over the place, not sure what we were supposed to do, and part of it was that there were so many issues to address, and we had to sort out what we could do and what was effective. So we're in 2018 at this point, and it's really confronting what's going on with the federal government and the rules and regulations that are coming down. And part of the things that we started to do then were following what was all the new rules and regulations, trying to understand the impact of them, and many times also commenting on them in, well, we have an advocacy newsletter, so we would do analysis of the rules and regulations. But in addition to that, we, as part of the advocacy, we would try to alert people as to when they could comment on those regulations, even perhaps suggesting language to send in comments. It was like, how would you want to say it? Spitting into the wind, because I'm sure the comments going to the Trump administration didn't have much of an impact on what we were doing, but at least we could have some voice. And we also did some letters to the editor of various newspapers, just basically trying to inform the local public and donors and the local community about what was going on at the federal level. And there were also local issues involving the regional jail and the city of Charlottesville's own response that we certainly stuck ourselves into or tried to. I think with the elections in 2018, 2019 that flipped the state legislature. It really then gave the advocacy committee an opportunity to have some real impact. And Edgar got involved very early in the Drive Virginia Forward movement to obtain driving license privileges for undocumented individuals. And we joined up with other organizations throughout the state who were interested in this issue. Spent some time, on the lobby days in early 2019, going to the state capitol and talking to various representatives, trying to chase down Cray deeds on the street at various times. And we got a mostly successful outcome. They're not exactly what we wanted, but fairly close. And Edgar in particular stayed on the ball in seeing that through and now trying to make sure that it accomplishes what we'd hoped it accomplished with protections of individual information. And then this year we again joined up with other organizations to lobby for various bills that were of interest to us. But in particular, Sin Barreras really took the lead on standby guardianship bill, which in essence inserted into an existing law the right of immigrant parents to appoint a standby guardian for their children in the case that they get deported or detained in connection with an immigration action. And we were met with local representatives with Senator Deeds and Sally Hudson, got their support. Senator Deeds in particular sponsored the bill. We spoke before the committees. We organized other individuals to speak before the committees of the legislature. And it was, I think, a very good experience for the organization overall because in two things. One is that we now have I would say, an excellent relationship with Delegate Hudson's office. And they now know that Sin Barreras is an organization they can come to find out what the immigrant community is thinking, what our interests are, and they're interested in partnering with us for that. And similarly with Senator Deeds' office, even though he was not on board with so much with the driver's license issue, he was very much on board with the guardianship issue. And we've got a great relationship with his office in any event. And they've invited us to continue to work with them. The other thing we got out of this was forging new relationships with other groups, local groups in the area and other groups throughout the state who were advocating for not only the standby guardianship, but various other bills. We now have contacts with the Virginia Poverty Law Center and with the Albemarle School District. And we had pre-existing relationships with Vocalo and Vasir that I think will continue to try to foster in the future. So overall, I guess the other thing I would add for any new members is that, or people who are thinking about volunteering, if we get new members on the committee, let me assure you, you'll be put to work immediately because there's so much to do and so many issues to explore and try to move forward. So I hope that's enticing to you. Thanks. So I think, Abby, you were going to talk about some of the different work that we have ongoing or that we do engage in particular.
Yeah, so obviously we've covered a lot of it, but the one thing I would add is that a lot of it, like as an advocacy committee, changes just based on like current events. I know like over the summer, like the census was something that was brought up a lot, and voter registration comes in and out of our meetings a lot depending on like when there's an election coming up. Things of that nature. We're always like, we keep in mind, discuss. I know like for the past couple months, we've been talking a lot about legislative sessions, which just ended. So, you know, it evolves based on what is happening at the state level, at the federal level. Yeah. What else? Like for tasks, each of us have like different things that we not like specialize in, but we tend to do more, I guess. Dan is very good at like the legislative aspect. He's in communication with a lot of the people he just mentioned, Vasir, the schools, the delegates. I know some committee members are more involved with the newsletter that we put out. And for example, personally, I'm starting to be involved with researching, which we do need more researchers, and that's starting up soon. I'm going to talk about that more later, but basically policy research, current events research, that's something that's of interest to me. So I bring a lot of that information in. Yeah.
So we were also going to just get in to talk a little bit more about some specific examples that have been of issues that we've worked on that, that we should talk about, right? Sharing some stories. But so I have a presentation here. It's just a couple slides, but with pictures that I'm going to share. I think I said it earlier, most of our work is behind the scenes, and that's on purpose because there's so much to do. But especially over like for the past several years, when it matters and when we need to be seen and heard, we have been willing to show up or lead different actions, right? We're not all about protests or things like that, but when it's needed, we definitely are moved into action because we focus on the things that are important to the community that we work with. We're not going to necessarily put this organization in front on issues that we don't work with, right? It's, we work with the immigrant, mostly Hispanic community in our area and other areas. So those issues, when it comes to that, that's where we need to show up, right? And that's where we lead. And so this slide has a few pictures of different actions that we've been involved in. And I won't talk in depth, but back in 2017, we had a walk for permanent protection for Dreamers. So we walked from Charlottesville to Richmond over the course of, I think, 4 days. With a bunch of, just people cycling in and out, but that's this picture here. There's a 287G in Culpeper that was starting up, and we showed up and took a lot of people from our area to try to let them know that we support them, and we definitely know how harmful those things are. And it ended up going into effect, but they're still working on that, and we're hoping, but we showed up for them, and that was important. The two pictures in the middle are just us in advocacy, right? We show up to Richmond during the General Assemblies to meet with different legislators. We show up throughout the year with our local legislators, and we try to make this a year-round work for the General Assembly, but most of the work happens when it's in session, which is January, February, March, depending on the year. Sometimes outside of that. And the top right is also inside the one of the chambers. You can't tell which. I think it's the Senate. And I think the rally that Dan was talking about, I think this is at the bottom right where I spoke. Anyway, let's see. So the issue I wanted to talk a little bit about, that's already been brought up, is the driver's license for all issue. So existing in Virginia, I'm not sure how familiar you all are with it, but existing in Virginia means you have to drive to survive. And so a lot of people that can't get it, and there's many people, undocumented people that exist here that weren't able to drive weren't able to get a driver's license, which criminalized them. And they were set up to fail, and it was just a matter of time. This was the primary way that people got onto the radar of ICE, or Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It was a leading cause of fear, detention, separation of families, not at the border, but right here in our community. So, and that's been an issue for years. And ever since I've been involved with Sin Barreras, it's been the #1 issue that we've worked on in terms of advocacy, or statewide advocacy. And you ask the community like what they need and what they want, it's always driver's license. So we definitely heard that, and that's where we put our effort. And the effort that we put in, just as we learned and got more familiar with how to do advocacy and made more connections, and as we grew little by little, our advocacy really grew. And I have to say, for this issue, which was a huge issue, we really stepped up in the past couple of years in many different ways, but including different actions that we led with. Like here on the screen, we had another walk. We like walking. It's a good way with all our signs, and it's a way to motivate people, we feel, in a non-violent way, and just with some sacrifice. So on the top left, we have we walked from Virginia Beach to Richmond, and it was a tough walk, and it was narrow side of streets, but it's just accentuated how difficult it is for people to exist without driving, right? That was very difficult and pretty dangerous at times. And down at the bottom, you see part of the end of it. We ended up, I don't think I have a picture more. I just have these pictures here now. But then later on, when it comes to this issue, the driver's license for all, these two pictures in the middle were just rallies that we had, or we would show up. We took a lot of people from the community locally. We had buses, vans, cars going to the Capitol a lot, because that's how much this mattered to us. And I think before 2020, what I heard from legislators, or what it seemed like, they barely saw the presence of the community that we represent and work with. But in 2020, there was no doubt they felt the presence, and it was a very positive presence. We heard that from so many people, how much they appreciated how nice and polite and honest and like all the stories that were shared. So these are pictures. It was a even though the Democrats took over in the General Assembly, that doesn't solve anything, right? That alone, they were more open to us, and it was a really tough fight. That's why we were showing up in such big numbers constantly. We wanted to show that presence and speak to them constantly, and we did. But I won't go into the details, but it was a fight to the very end. And even so, one of the issues at the end was driver privilege card versus driver's license. We wanted a driver's license, and they were going to go with some sort of inferior version of a driver privilege card that might have been like pink, different color, or had different words that just made it like very obvious that a person holding it is undocumented. And we didn't want that, because there's so many issues with that. So we locally called our community, to think of what actions we want to have, or what we could do with just like a couple days left. And very quickly, I think the idea to meet and come together happened on a Friday afternoon. And then we met Saturday. I called for 3 meetings, like, which one do you want to show up to? It ended up being all 3 meetings, right? It was just, first meeting was brainstorming, second meeting was decision, and then third meeting was planning. And it just happened that way. And on Tuesday, which was the day of a primary, I think too, You see on the right, on the far right, this is on the downtown mall. I forget how many people showed up, but it was well over 300, maybe 400. Our community came out, so if a lot of people locally, this was also a march from the downtown mall to Senator Deed's office, which is not far from there, because one of his comments was that it seemed like he didn't care, and he was one of the holdouts from the Democrats, right? That, and he said that he didn't see this as a top issue for our community locally. So this was our response to him. We were like, oh yeah, well, let's call people out. And so this is what we did. And, you know, a lot of people from our community, I think he was like so many calls, but I mean, he didn't budge fully. We ended up getting not everything we wanted, but we ended up with the driver privilege card, which was at least a much better version of the driver privilege card that looks exactly the same, and it just says temporary license on the back. There, you know, and there's a lot of things that we continue to work on, and we want to continue to improve it. But you know, these things are tough, and I mean, I think that ended up being that was a compromise, and it's really tough. You know, you want the best, but we also, like, this is a real issue, and especially with the pandemic that happened afterward. At this moment, there's people that now have the ability to obtain a driver privilege card, and we're still doing a lot of work because there's a lot of more challenges, which I won't go into now, but this is what I wanted to share. This is one example, and I think Abby was going to get into another example.
Yeah, so when I first joined, met Edgar, those pictures, that's kind of what I was envisioning for my help to the committee and like with advocacy. But as I spoke on before, about a week or 2 weeks later was right when like Virginia shut down, the country shut down. And so my role changed a lot. I remember the first time we met was actually right before one of those marches, I believe. I was with Edgar at the church, and we were trying to organize like buses and carpooling to one of those marches. And I was very involved, and I was really excited to get into that work. But unfortunately, you know, gatherings weren't allowed afterwards. So my position changed a lot. But one of the things that I would say was like really rewarding and seeing like a kind of like full circle with the driver's privilege card is guardianship, which has already been brought up. But when I first joined, I remember it was brought up in the first committee and I took notes on it. But I had no clue what it was. I didn't know exactly what it meant. I know Edgar briefly explained to me like, oh, it has to do with appointing guardianship in the case of detention or deportation, and that's about as much as I knew about it, but I ran with it. Over the summer, one of my roles was I volunteered to kind of be a part of a like smaller group that like talked to Senator Deeds at one point over the summer to explain why we were trying to push this bill. And luckily that was one of the ideas that he was more welcoming to. We presented a couple things, but standby guardianship was definitely the most interesting to him. I'm not sure if that's the right way to word it. But yeah, he supported us, and he was one of the people who like presented the bill, and it got passed, and it will be started to be implemented in July, I believe. So that's one of those things that is just like I said, full circle. When I first joined, I barely knew what it was. As I got more involved with the committee, did more research into it, we spoke more on it, communicated with legislators, senators, and then we watched it go through the Senate, all of the sessions, and now I'm seeing it like a success story. I guess what I'm trying to say, like even virtually, it wasn't what I thought it would be, but I still did a lot of work. We all did a lot of work virtually, and it got passed. So it's awesome.
You know, I want to say too, how much I also appreciate Dan with this, because, you know, that same meeting that you're talking about, the three of us were there with others, with Senator Deeds. And, you know, you realize that you have to keep working with people. And like I was mad at Senator Deeds, right? I didn't want to talk to him. And, so like Dan took the lead scheduling that meeting, and we're in the meeting, and I'm growling a little bit, but on mute. And because it was virtual now, right? But he led a lot of those interactions, and, I don't know, as time went on, I mean, you see that need to work with others. And I'm still gonna get mad at people at times, but like, that's why I'm glad to have other people, and that maybe could keep a leveler head about it, and maybe I just stay quiet and I just say the minimum or whatever, right? But because of that, I mean, that positive interaction and just sharing who we are and working on that relationship, he did lead the bill for standby guardianship, which is also very important.
Yeah. So, I just want to talk a little bit about the legislative process that we sort of have been learning about the last couple of years. And our experiences were that we didn't know what we were getting into in terms of once the legislative session started, it was kind of nonstop work because we had to be available to speak at committee hearings and to confer with people and talk to our allies. But the other thing is that what we have also learned is that even though the legislative session is over, we now are at a point that we have to start thinking about the legislative session next year. If we have a bill that we're interested in or an issue that we're interested in, we've got to start now in formulating the proposal that we want to put forth, and also getting in touch with Sally Hudson and Craig Deeds to see if they have a capacity to sponsor something like what we're talking about. So it is kind of a whirlwind activity, and it's as I said, we've got to start right now on thinking about next year, and it's a little bit complicated with new elections coming up, but there's work to be done right now. The other thing I want to say is that when we're talking about advocacy, it may seem like, okay, we're proposing new laws, we're commenting on regulations, et cetera. But something that Edgar talked about was advocacy has also come to include the follow-up, which is done on the driver's licenses for all. After a law gets passed, he's worked to kind of smooth out the kinks from it and make sure that it's functioning the way we want to do it. And that's involved Edgar in talking to the local DMV and the officials there to make sure that the law is being carried out the way it's supposed to. So it's there's a wide range of activities on the advocacy committee. So
I'll just say another quick thing is there's been many times because we're small and sometimes newer to advocacy, there's a lot of bigger organizations that know, I guess, how it should be done. And sometimes, may look at us as naive, or at least, from my perspective at times. But, we show up asking for the things that we really want and we really need. And through this work, sometimes, and we've seen it now, we accomplish those things they said couldn't be done. Like we've done this. So, and not having a lot of resources or people and still needing help, but we still made it make things happen at times. With the standby guardianship, for example, we always talk to other people to help us with that. We wanted them to lead it, but it came down to us. And, we never did all the things we wanted, but when do you, right? But we did enough and all the way through, and it really passed every stage without a single vote against it, which was great because it also meant a little bit less work for us, which was, we welcomed.
So we have about 8 minutes left. Did you have other things? I don't want to do it.
There's no questions there, right?
Yeah, so I wanted to see if there are any follow-up questions. I noticed there are people that have some opinions about things in here. There's one, not necessarily question, but maybe you can say if this has come up any in the committee already or not. Advocacy related to redistricting, to make sure that immigrant communities are protected locally. Has that come up yet with the committee, or?
Anyone want to take it?
I can take it really quick and kind of maybe plug my subcommittee for research, but no, that has not come up, unfortunately, but I do see that it's like a relevant issue. And as I've been speaking about a little bit before, we do want to expand a little on research just to be able to be more inclusive of different issues related to the community, and also just the issues that we already have in front of us. Sometimes we need more information on them that we just can't get to. So we are looking for people to help us out in terms of like coming up with other policy or current events related to immigration that we can look into and talk about as a committee, and kind of figure out ways that we can use our positions to help out. So redistricting would be a perfect example of that. Like, I'm not sure how willing, but if that's a conversation we can have, and we can do some research on that and talk about it in the committee, see what we can do to help moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, it came up very briefly, right? Just like, because there's these meetings that happen, right? It happens every Monday, but we have to prioritize, right? We can't do everything, and we have to focus on the things that we're best suited for. And, you know, and with the people we have, you know, we definitely need to prioritize, because we can't do everything. And sometimes it really takes maybe an individual or two to take the lead and really get into a thing. And maybe, you know, we leverage those efforts, and then, you know, the connection that Sin Barreras has with the community and so forth, right?
I know that the SEER, I think, was concerned about the redistricting, and there was a bill to, I think, make sure that there was adequate representation on the redistricting committee or commission, but that moved so quickly, I'm not sure that ever got a foothold at all.
Well, there's meetings happening right now, like they're Mondays, I forget, like once a month, where they're having meetings, and I think just like showing up and like doing the work around that. But I'm not up to speed with that. Again, you know, we can't do it all. Like, we have to focus and try to be productive on a couple of issues.
Looks like we have a question. Go ahead, Sheila.
So one of the reasons I'm really interested in this committee, or two reasons. One is it's harder for me to get into Charlottesville the older I get, and there seems like there's a bunch that can be done remotely. And the other is my Spanish. It's not that great. So, you know, it's enough to fool people who don't speak Spanish. So can you address those?
Well, Sheila, I can address it. I speak no Spanish. So I think that was the difficulty early on, and we're trying to find something I could do for Sin Barreras. So the advocacy committee can use you. Yeah.
And also, Abby and Sheila, I don't know if you've connected like visually yet, but Sheila is the one that I sent over to Abby for the subcommittee. So just in case you haven't physically seen each other, there you go. Are there any other questions floating out there in the last few minutes?
If I might, I've had a couple of thoughts and thought not to intervene, but in the end, I think maybe it's useful to take a broader perspective. I've been with Sin Barreras for almost 8 years. And as Edgar was saying in part of his presentation, in the early days, it was basically a do-gooder organization. And we ran around, scurrying around, doing good as best we could with as few people as we had. It was in 2016 that we came to the recognition that it isn't good enough to scurry around doing good things. You have to have a broader impact because the needs of our community are so great. So in 2016, as part of the strategic plan that we do every 3 years, we put advocacy as one of our 4 priorities. And as Edgar said, it is impossible to describe to you how important the driver's license issue was. Our normal workshops in those days was 25, 30 people. When we had a workshop on driver's licenses, we had 350 people come. It was the burning issue because, those of you who know me, I work in immigration, because if you got arrested 3 times for driving without a license, you wound up deported. And we know by name people who were deported for driving for the 3rd time without a license. So Edgar, we all can't describe to you how incredibly important this driver's license, driver's privilege card has been. It is an enormous win. This has been in existence since 1992, when the Virginia legislature made it impossible for undocumented people. So for 25 years, undocumenteds have been unable to drive legally in Virginia. This is an enormous win, beyond comparison. Then, and now there are continued advocacy needs to make it even better, to make it more indistinguishable, etc., as Edgar has described. Now, Dan and the crew, the advocacy committee, has come with this brand new idea. We used to do powers of attorney for people who would turn over the care of their child to their next door neighbor. Not a relative, not a cousin, not an uncle, to their next door neighbor, because their next door neighbor had a green card. So this idea of the guardianship is another enormous win. And for a little tiny organization in little tiny Central Virginia to have this kind of statewide impact is just terrific. I'm not involved in advocacy. I'm not involved in the committee. I have other things that take up my time. The work that this committee does, the work that Sin Barreras does in this sector is just, I can't describe to you how impactful it is for the Hispanic community. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Frank. Yeah, and for those of you that aren't aware, Frank is a longtime volunteer with us, and as not a member of the board, but similar to the board, I think they would say that the volunteer is kind of almost feels like a career. So because everyone is so engaged and offers so much of their time and, you know, their heart and passion and skills, that is what has led Sin Barreras to continue to grow the way it has. So, so I want to thank you all very much for coming, and just some things to keep in mind related to what you heard here tonight. I want to remind everyone, language isn't a big issue in terms of the Spanish proficiency you have. Right now, they're doing a lot of things remotely anyways. So if you're farther out, that's all right. It's also one of the ways you can engage with Sin Barreras in a meaningful way that is flexible with scheduling, because they do have some meetings that are like at a regular time, but anything that happens outside of that to keep things moving forward, you schedule in time together like that. So those are things to keep in mind. Also know that I think as Edgar mentioned, sometimes maybe there's something the committee is not currently doing, but from your experiences in the world, and by also listening on the committee, as he mentioned, you might see something that you could take a lead on and help us grow into that area. So that's very much about how you are present in the committee and how much you want to give of yourself and your time. So things to keep in mind. And as I always promise, really quickly here, I'm going to put in the chat the link to the prize drawing. Oh, thank you.
I want to add to that too. I mean, not only is she doing it, I think it's a win, the fact that we have Shayla, right, a volunteer coordinator that's not a volunteer because it needed to be a paid position, but also Shayla, who she is and her work, and yeah, that's great too.
Thanks, Edgar. All right, so here's your link, and I put it in the chat, as I said. Again, thank you all so much for coming. The recording of this will be posted, so also keep in mind if you have friends or other people that you think may be a good match for this, feel free to direct them to the video. I'll be mailing it out in an email tomorrow. Also, feel free to share my email that's there at the bottom in terms of anyone who you think might be interested in volunteering. That way, you know, if you have them email me, that's the best way to start the process of onboarding and getting involved that way. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, everybody.
And yeah, have a great rest of your evening, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.